Hello, dear listeners. I'm so excited to each week be bringing you thoughts, breakdowns, and comparisons for novels and their film or TV adaptations. I'm Tracey, I'll be your host, and this is a Novel Take podcast.
I understand this topic is difficult for some members of the community due to the controversial stance the author has taken on trans issues, and I want to state that I do not agree with the author and her views. This podcast is a safe space for everyone to come together and share their love of Harry Potter without judgment. The only judgment being served is upon the movie adaptations.
Hello and happy Friday to you all, friends. Thank you for joining me again and congratulations on making it to the end of another week. However your week has gone, please give yourselves a pat on the back or pop some bubbly or do whatever you need to acknowledge you've made it through and tomorrow is a new day. Last week, I mentioned catching up with a dear friend who I hadn't seen in a very long time. And we did catch up on Friday night, and we had so much fun trying to squeeze 7 years of gossip into just a couple of hours. There was laughter and tears, and I had forgotten just how much I missed my friend Ross. The even better news is he might end up coming onto the podcast when I get to the very end of Deathly Hallows. So let's keep everything crossed. I'll tell you what, this week has been fun for me. If you've listened along since the start, first off, thank you. But you'll also know that this whole podcasting thing is new to me. So I'm still tweaking bits of the podcast and figuring out the whole social media side of things. And I had a great chat GPT session, which gave me some amazing guidance on how to use Instagram and Threads to better effect. So just know things will be getting better on that front. Last week, I was up till 5 a.m. Friday morning recording and editing the episode. And I'm happy to say I'm in a much better place this week. So, with no desire to hear the birds chirping like I did a week ago, let's get into things. Last week, we left Harry just as he and Ron had saved Hermione from a troll in the bathroom on Halloween. This had cemented the foundation for their friendship, and from here on, they are a trio, not a duo any longer. They had endured a double potions class with the Slytherins and also had, along with Neville, discovered the three-headed dog in the third floor corridor that was off limits, but weirdly able to be accessed with a simple Alohomora spell. Go figure. It's time for a break, and when I get back, let's get into this week's chapters. Welcome back. This week, we start our comparison with Chapter 11, Quidditch. In the book, at Hogwarts, they are headed into November and the weather is turning cold. Quidditch season begins on Saturday and Harry is playing in his first match. He's been training for weeks and the first match is Gryffindor versus Slytherin. He likes that he now has Hermione as a friend and she's given him Quidditch through the ages, which has been an interesting read. Quote, Harry learnt there were 700 ways of committing a Quidditch foul and that all of them had happened during a World Cup match in 1473. That Seekers were usually the smallest and fastest players and that most serious Quidditch accidents seemed to happen to them. Hermione is more relaxed about breaking the rules since Ron and Harry saved her. On the Friday before Harry's first match, they're in the courtyard and she conjures up a bright blue fire, which can be carried round in a jam jar. They're all getting warm around the fire when Harry notices Snape across the yard and he's limping. They block the fire from view, but Snape sees them getting a little bit dodgy and comes over. He takes Quidditch through the ages from Harry because he's just looking for something to be a dick about, right? Quote, library books are not meant to be taken outside the school. 5 points from Gryffindor. Now they're all convinced he's just made that rule up and they're wondering what's wrong with his leg. That night in the common room, Hermione's checking their homework. She won't let them copy hers, but they ask her to read through theirs and get the right answers anyway. Harry wants to get Quidditch through the ages back, so he gets up and goes to the staff room. He knocks, but there's no answer, so he pushes the door in and sees Snape and Filch inside, and Snape is holding his robes above his knees. One of his legs is bloody and mangled, and Filch is handing him bandages. Snape says, quote, "How are you supposed to keep your eyes on all three heads at once?" He notices Harry, who says he just wanted his book back, but they yell at him to get out. Harry runs away before Snape can take any more points off Gryffindor. When he gets back to the common room, he tells Ron and Hermione and says, quote, "You know what this means. He tried to get past that three-headed dog at Halloween. That's where he was going when we saw him. He's after whatever it's guarding, and I bet my broomstick he let the troll in to create a diversion." Hermione says she knows Snape wouldn't try and do something like that, even though he's not nice. Ron says Hermione thinks all teachers are saints, but that he agrees with Harry and wouldn't put anything past Snape. He then queries what could the dog be guarding. Harry can't sleep that night thinking about it all, and Neville is snoring, so the next morning he's too nervous to eat. In the movie, at breakfast, Harry can't eat, same as the book, but here Snape comes up to Harry and wishes him luck, even if he is playing Slytherin. He limps away, and Harry explains his theory about Snape leading the troll in as a diversion, and then tells Hermione about when he and Hagrid took something from Gringotts. Hedwig arrives with what is obviously a broomstick for Harry, and they open it at the table. In the book, we've already had this scene, but here, when Harry looks to find Hedwig, she's sitting with Professor McGonagall, and it's a lovely nod to the book where McGonagall gets the broomstick for Harry. In the book, by 11 o'clock, the whole school is at the Quidditch pitch. Students have binoculars, as it's still hard to see what's happening. Quote, Ron and Hermione joined Neville, Seamus, and Dean, the West Ham fan, up in the top row. As a surprise for Harry, they had painted a large banner on one of the sheets Scabbers had ruined. It said, "Potter for President," and Dean, who was good at drawing, had done a large Gryffindor lion underneath. Then Hermione had performed a tricky little charm so that the paint flashed different colours. In the changing rooms, Harry and the Gryffindor team are getting into their scarlet Quidditch robes, and Wood begins his pep talk, but the Weasley twins take over, saying to Harry they know Wood's speech by heart. They were on the team last year. Wood tells them to shut up. In the movie, Wood tells a story about his first Quidditch match, which is not in the book at all. There's no banner saying Potter for President, and Hagrid is already in the stands with them. In the book, the Gryffindor team head out onto the pitch. Madam Hooch is refereeing, and out of the corner of his eye, Harry sees the Potter for President banner and feels a bit braver. Harry thinks the Slytherin captain, Marcus Flint, quote, "looked as if he had some troll blood in him." Lee Jordan is commentating the match, watched by Professor McGonagall, and it's like the movie with the action, the quaffle being passed and Gryffindor score first. Gryffindor cheers fill the air, and Hagrid joins Ron and Hermione in the stands. He's been watching from his hut, but it's not the same, as he wanted to join them. Harry's above the game, looking for signs of the snitch. When Angelina scored, he did a couple of loop-de-loops, but is now back looking for the snitch. Slytherin has the quaffle, but the player, Adrian Pusey, drops it as he looks over his shoulder at a flash of golden. Harry's in a rush, diving down after the streak of gold. Slytherin seeker Terence Higgs has seen it as well, and just as Harry puts on a spurt of speed, wham! Marcus Flint blocks Harry and his broom is off course. In the movie, it's awesome to see Quidditch at play, and one thing I found weird that I'd never considered before, and I know it's all clearly CGI players, but the silence between the players is unsettling. When you're playing sports, there's always shouts, etc., to your teammates, and here, aside from Flint directing his team where to go, and the crowd in the background, there's no sound. One of the Gryffindor players gets barreled into the bunting on the stands and only covers her head. There's no scream or vocal reaction from her. Flint also hits a bludger towards Wood, knocking him off the broom and out of the match. In the book, Harry holds onto his broom as the Gryffindors yell foul. Madam Hooch speaks angrily to Flint and Gryffindor get a free shot, but the golden snitch has disappeared. Lee Jordan is having trouble not taking sides, saying, quote, "After that obvious and disgusting bit of cheating, Jordan," growled Professor McGonagall. "I mean, after that open and revolting foul, Jordan, I'm warning you." All right. Flint nearly kills the Gryffindor seeker, which could happen to anyone, I'm sure. Harry dodges a bludger and his broom starts lurching around, trying to buck him off. He tries to head towards the Gryffindor goals to ask Wood to call a timeout, but the broom is out of his control. He can't direct it anywhere. He's getting higher and higher, and Hagrid notices Harry's lost control of his broom. The Weasley twins go to help Harry, but the broom jerks away each time they try and get close, so they circle underneath to catch him if he falls. Seamus wonders if something happened when Flint knocked into him. Hagrid tells them, quote, "Can't nothing interfere with a broomstick except powerful dark magic. No kid could do that to a Nimbus 2000. Hermione takes Hagrid's binoculars but doesn't look at Harry. She's searching the crowd and spots Snape with his, quote, eyes fixed on Harry and was muttering nonstop under his breath. She says he is jinxing Harry's broom and she disappears. Ron looks back at Harry, the whole crowd on their feet, terrified. Marcus Flint gets the quaffle and scores 5 times for Slytherin without anyone noticing. Hermione fights her way across the stands to Snape and accidentally knocks Professor Quirrell into the front row on her way. She reaches Snape and conjures one of her bright blue flames onto the hem of his robes. After about 30 seconds, Snape notices he's on fire and Hermione scoops the fire into a jar and heads back. In the movie, without Wood in front of the goals, Slytherin score a couple of times, and a great catch is seeing Filch among the Slytherin supporters cheering them on. Hermione sees Snape through the binoculars and heads over to set fire to Snape's robes. Harry manages to get back on his broom once Snape is distracted and Quirrell is knocked down in the commotion. There's some argy-bargy with the Slytherin Seeker as they chase the snitch. Harry stands on his broom and catches the snitch. In the book, Harry is able to get back on his broom and is now speeding towards the ground. The crowd see him, quote, clap his hand to his mouth as though he was about to be sick. He hit the pitch on all fours, coughed, and something gold fell into his hand. I've got the snitch, he shouted, waving it above his head, and the game ended in complete confusion. Flint is howling that Harry didn't catch it. He nearly swallowed it. But Harry hadn't broken any rules, and Lee Jordan is happily shouting the result, quote, Gryffindor had won by 170 points to 60. In the movie, Professor McGonagall is so happy, and Snape looks weary, and also tries to school his face to show nothing. In the book, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had made their way to Hagrid's and didn't hear any of that. Hagrid made them a strong cup of tea. Ron says it was Snape and Hermione saw him, but Hagrid says rubbish. Snape wouldn't do that. Harry tells them they think Snape tried to get past the three-headed dog on Halloween and it bit him. They think he's trying to steal whatever it's guarding. Hagrid asks how they know about Fluffy and that he's lent him to Dumbledore to guard the nope, don't ask me anymore, quote, that's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicolas Flamel. Aha, said Harry, so there's someone called Nicolas Flamel involved, is there? Hagrid is furious with himself. In the movie, after the match, Harry, Ron and Hermione are walking with Hagrid, telling him about the three-headed dog. The scene isn't in Hagrid's hut. Hagrid does mention about Fluffy and that he lent Fluffy to Dumbledore, and he also mentions Nicolas Flamel. And this scene ends in the movie at around 1 hour, 25 minutes and 9 seconds. Okay, friends, chapter 12 is the Mirror of Erised. It's Christmas, mid-December, and there's several feet of snow covering the castle grounds. The lake is frozen, and the Weasley twins have bewitched snowballs to bounce at the back of Professor Quirrell's turban, which is absolutely hilarious considering who we know is under there. I think it's great. In the Gryffindor common room and the Great Hall, there's roaring fires, the corridors are icy cold, and the wind rattles the classroom windows. In Potions class, in the dungeons, their breath rises in a mist, and they keep as close as possible to their hot cauldrons. Professor McGonagall had come around making a list of students who would be staying over Christmas, and Harry signed up at once. It's probably the best Christmas he'll have. Ron and his brothers are staying as well because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley are going to Romania to visit Charlie. When they leave the dungeons at the end of Potions, there's a large fir tree blocking the corridor and Hagrid's behind it. Malfoy comes up and starts having a go at Ron, saying, is he trying to earn extra money by helping out Hagrid? And just as Ron dives for Malfoy, Snape comes up and catches him and says, quote, fighting is against Hogwarts rules. 5 points from Gryffindor Weasley, and be grateful it isn't more. Here, Ron says about Malfoy, quote, I'll get him. One of these days, I'll get him. And Harry says, quote, I hate them both, Malfoy and Snape. Harry, Ron, and Hermione follow Hagrid with the tree to the Great Hall, where there are no fewer than 12 Christmas trees. Some have tiny, sparkling icicles, some hundreds of glittering candles. There's one more day of school left, and Hermione reminds them they need to go to the library. Hagrid says, the library? Just before the holidays? Bit keen, aren't ya? And Harry tells him that ever since he mentioned Nicolas Flamel, they've been looking for him. Hagrid is absolutely shocked and says, quote, drop it. It's nothing to you what that dog's garden. Harry says, quote, unless you'd like to tell us and save us the trouble, to which Hagrid says, quote, I'm not saying nothing. In the movie, it's snowing and Hagrid is dragging a tree inside. In the book, ever since Hagrid let Flamel's name slip, they've been searching the library every chance they get between classes. They've been through great wizards of the 20th century, notable magical names of our time, important modern magical discoveries, a study of recent developments in wizardry. They go their separate ways. Hermione has a list of subjects to check, and Ron starts just taking books down at random. Harry wanders over to the restricted section where you need a special note to look at the books. The librarian, Madame Pince, tells Harry to get out of the restricted section, and he meets up with Ron and Hermione in the corridor. They haven't found anything either, and they head to lunch. Hermione asks them if they'll keep looking while she's away and to send an owl if they find anything, and Ron says that she could ask her parents. Once the holidays begin, Harry and Ron don't have much time to think about Flamel. They're having too much fun. They have the whole dormitory to themselves, and the common room is empty, so they get the good armchairs by the fire and eat anything they can spear on a toasting fork. Ron teaches Harry about wizard's chess, which is just like muggle chess, except the figures are alive. Quote, Ron's set was very old and battered, like everything else he owned. It had once belonged to someone else in the family, in this case, his grandfather. However, old chessmen weren't a drawback at all. Ron knew them so well he never had any trouble getting them to do what he wanted. Harry played with chessmen Seamus Finnegan had lent him, and they didn't trust him at all. He wasn't a very good player yet, and they kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was very confusing. In the movie, ghosts are roaming the halls singing Christmas carols. Hermione is dragging her trunk into the Great Hall where Ron and Harry are playing wizard's chess. During their interaction is where we learn Ron's brother Charlie is in Romania studying dragons, something Book Harry found out on the train. Hermione tells them to look in the restricted section for Nicolas Flamel, not Harry thinking it himself. And Ron says a line that's just in the movie, quote, I think we've had a bad influence on her. In the book, on Christmas Eve, Harry goes to bed looking forward to the next day, to all the fun and food, and he's not expecting presents. But when he wakes up, there's a small pile of packages on his bed. Quote, Harry picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in thick brown paper, and scrawled across it was, To Harry from Hagrid. Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it himself. Harry blew it. It sounded a bit like an owl. A second, very small parcel contained a note. We received your message and enclosed your Christmas present from Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia. Sticky taped to the note was a 50-pence piece. Ron is fascinated by it, and Harry says he can keep it. He's got more presents, and Ron says one of them is from his mum. He told her he didn't think Harry would expect any presents. So she's made Harry a Weasley jumper. And can we just take a moment to stop and appreciate how thoughtful Ron is in this scene? He told his mum Harry didn't expect presents. How many people would do that, let alone an 11-year-old? I would have loved this to be kept in the movie. It just shows the depth that is missing in movie Ron. Harry opens the parcel and finds a thick hand-knitted sweater in emerald green. There's also a large box of homemade fudge. Harry's next present is a large box of chocolate frogs from Hermione. Question. I've always wondered how they get their presents, because they're not able to go to Hogsmeade yet. So is it like mail order thing from Honeydukes in Hogsmeade? Like, do they send an owl with the order and it comes back? Do they have it delivered by the morning post? And if so, wouldn't Harry and Ron have seen this delivered to her? These are questions not necessary to the story, but it's just some stuff that I've always thought about. That leaves only one present left on his bed, and when Harry picks it up, it's very light. He unwraps it and, quote, something fluid and silvery grey went slithering to the floor where it lay in gleaming folds. Ron gasps and tells Harry it's really rare and really valuable, and it's an invisibility cloak. Harry picks it up, and it feels like water woven into material. He puts it on, and in the mirror, his reflection completely vanishes. There's a note that says in loopy writing that Harry's never seen before, quote, your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you. Harry feels a bit strange, wondering who sent the cloak and had it really belonged to his father. Then the dormitory doors fly open and Fred and George burst in. They're wearing jumpers that have an F and a G on the front. Harry hides the cloak. Percy comes in too, and he's carrying a jumper which has a P on the front, which Fred and George tease him is P for prefect. In the movie, on Christmas morning, the presents are under the tree in the common room. Ron calls Harry down, and I'm sorry, but Harry has bare feet as he comes down the stone stairs, and all I can think about is how cold that must be. The first present Harry opens is the cloak. There's nice attention to detail here with Ron eating their every flavour beans that he got in the book from Hermione. I'm glad they kept it in, and the bit about Ron talking about the cloak and didn't even try and explain it away or anything like that. In the book, Harry had the best Christmas of his life. There were, quote, 100 fat roast turkeys, mountains of roasted and boiled potatoes, platters of fat chipolatas, tureens of buttered peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy and cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard crackers every few feet along the table. This is something I think that would have been great in the movie, the wizard crackers. They go off like a blast and engulf you in blue smoke, and inside are all sorts of goodies. There's a rear admiral's hat, several live white mice, a flowered bonnet that Professor Dumbledore swaps his pointed wizard hat for. And when Harry leaves the table, he has a pack of non-explodable luminous balloons, a grow your own warts kit, and his own new wizard's chess set, which he breaks in by losing spectacularly to Ron. Even though it was Harry's best Christmas ever, there's something nagging in the back of his mind, and when he finally gets to bed, he can think about it. The invisibility cloak and whoever sent it. When Ron falls asleep, Harry pulls out the cloak. It had been his father's. He let it flow over his hands, smoother than silk, light as air. He remembers the note that said, use it well, so he puts the cloak on and goes to the restricted section of the library. He lights a lamp, and the sight of it just floating in midair creeps him out. He steps over a rope which separates the restricted section from the rest of the books, but the title of the books don't tell him much. One book had a dark stain on it that looked like blood, and the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. There's some whispering coming from the books, and he sets the lamp down and picks one up. It falls open, and there's a blood-curdling shriek. He snaps the book shut, but it keeps going on, and he stumbles backwards, knocking over the lamp, which goes out. He hears footsteps coming down the corridor and runs for it, passing the doorway where Filch looks straight through him. He's off up the corridor and comes to a halt in front of a tall suit of armor. He's been so busy getting away from the library that he hasn't been paying attention to where he's gone, and he doesn't recognize where he is. Harry overhears, quote, you asked me to come directly to you, Professor, if anyone was wandering around at night, and somebody's been in the library. Restricted section. Harry felt the blood drain out of his face. Wherever he was, Filch must know a shortcut because his soft, greasy voice was getting nearer, and to his horror, it was Snape who replied, the restricted section. Well, they can't be too far. We'll find them. In the movie, it cuts from Harry opening the cloak to him in the library heading to the restricted section. Is he wearing the same clothes here as he will in the final part of the movie? It looks like he's wearing the same jumper and pants. Does anyone else think that as well? Harry opens a book that screams and Filch comes in. He knocks over the lamp and gets away. At around 1 hour, 30 minutes, 41 seconds, this isn't in the book yet, but there's a scene between Snape and Quirrell. Snape senses Harry is there, but Harry moves back out of reach, and Filch arrives and tells them about the lamp and that there's a student out of bed. Then Snape immediately rushes off. In the book, Harry backs through a door to a disused classroom. There's shapes of desks and chairs piled against the walls, and facing him is, quote, a magnificent mirror as high as the ceiling with an ornate gold frame, standing on two clawed feet. There was an inscription carved around the top. Erised stra ehru oit ube kafru oit on wasi. If we read this backwards, because, friends, it's a mirror, it says, I show not your face, but your heart's desire. Harry moves closer to the mirror to see himself, but there's no reflection. He stands in front of it and he claps his hand to his mouth so he doesn't scream. He looks behind him, but there's no one there. But when he looks back in the mirror, there's a whole crowd of people standing behind him. The room is empty, so he looks at the mirror closely. Quote, a woman standing right behind his reflection was smiling at him and waving. He reached out a hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd touch her. Their reflections were so close together, but he only felt air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair and her eyes. Her eyes were just like mine, Harry thought, edging a little closer to the glass. Bright green, exactly the same shape. But then he noticed she was crying, smiling, but crying at the same time. The tall, thin, black-haired man standing next to her put his arm around her. He wore glasses and his hair was very untidy. It stuck up at the back just like Harry's did. Harry was so close to the mirror now that his nose was nearly touching that of his reflection. Mum, he whispered. Dad? They just looked at him smiling, and slowly Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw other pairs of green eyes, just like his, other noses like his, even a little old man who looked as though he had Harry's knobbly knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potters smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them, his hands pressed flat against the glass as though he was hoping to fall right through and reach them. He had a powerful kind of ache inside him, half joy, half terrible sadness. This is something they don't show in the movie, which I get because ease of making this scene work, and that's enough in the movie that Harry just sees his parents. But this in the book, it makes me nearly tear up just thinking this is the first time Harry's seen his family who look like him. He doesn't fit in with the Dursleys. He doesn't look like them. He's just not like them in any way. But here are people with the same eyes, his same hair color. His dad's got the same hair as him sticking up at the back. And I haven't read these books for 7 years. And I think this is the first time I'm actually getting emotional reading this part of it. I don't know if it's because living in the UK now, I'm away from my immediate family and I miss them. I don't know what it is, but I've never been emotional about this scene before, but I am now. And my heart just breaks for Harry. Harry leaves and the next day tells Ron what he saw, saying they can go back tonight. Ron says eagerly, quote, I'd like to see your mum and dad. And just, we love a supportive best friend. Book Ron is just the best. They did him such a disservice in the movies. We love a supportive best friend. Yes, Ron. Harry is looking forward to seeing his parents again, and he's forgotten about Flamel. He and Ron are under the cloak looking for the room. Ron starts moaning that his feet are cold, but Harry spots the suit of armor. They enter the classroom, drop the cloak, and run to the mirror. His parents are there, and Harry grabs Ron, but he doesn't see Harry's family. Ron says, quote, I'm alone, but I'm different. I look older. And I'm head boy. I'm wearing the badge like Bill used to, and I'm holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup. I'm Quidditch captain too. Ron is excited by this prospect, asking if the mirror shows the future. Harry says, how can it? All his family are dead. There's a noise, and they quickly pull the cloak back over themselves as Mrs. Norris comes in, and they rush back to the dormitory. The next day, Ron is trying to get Harry to do something, but all Harry can think about is going back to the mirror. And Ron has a bad feeling about it and begs Harry not to go back. In the movie, after Snape rushes away from Quirrell and Filch, we see a door open, but there's no suit of armor around it. It just looks like a different angle of the third floor corridor. Harry sees the mirror and it has the inscription on it. He sees his parents. It's a heartbreaking scene, and props to Daniel Radcliffe. This scene in front of the mirror is done beautifully. That night, he wakes Ron up and they go to the mirror, and it's the same as in the book. In the book, on the third night, Harry finds his way quicker and he's making so much noise. As he sits in front of the mirror and thinks there's nothing stopping him from staying there all night, a voice says, quote, "Back again, Harry." His insides turn to ice, and sitting on the desks by the wall is Professor Dumbledore. It's much the same as in the movie. Harry asks how he knows what Ron saw. Professor Dumbledore says, quote, "I don't need a cloak to become invisible." Which, oh my gosh, what is Professor Dumbledore using to become invisible? That's amazing. Is he using the Hogwarts house elves to keep an eye on things? What do we think? How does Dumbledore not need a cloak to become invisible? I know just he's Dumbledore because plot, but there has to be something. What are our thoughts? Dumbledore tells Harry what the mirror is, and it's being moved to a new home, and he asks Harry not to look for it again. But if you do come across it, he'll be prepared. Hashtag foreshadowing. As he leaves, Harry asks Professor Dumbledore what he sees in the mirror, and he says, quote, "I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. One can never have enough socks." In the movie, it cuts from the scene with Ron to Harry sitting in front of the mirror. Professor Dumbledore arrives, and it's much the same as in the book, except he doesn't say to Harry that he'll be prepared if he sees the mirror again, and Harry doesn't ask him what he sees. This part of the movie ends at 1 hour, 36 minutes, and 40 seconds. Chapter 13 is Nicolas Flamel and opens with Harry wishing he could forget what he saw in the mirror, but his cloak stays at the bottom of his trunk and he doesn't go looking for it. He starts having nightmares, though, where he dreams, quote, about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light while a high voice cackled with laughter. Harry tells Ron about the dreams, and Ron says Professor Dumbledore was right about the mirror driving him mad. When Hermione comes back, she's disappointed that they didn't find anything on Flamel, but Harry is sure he's read the name somewhere. When classes start again, they go back to looking when they can between classes in the library. There's another Quidditch match coming up, and it's against Hufflepuff. Wood is just working the team harder than ever. Question: do they not have coaches at Hogwarts? Is the team captain the coach? I don't think I've ever seen or heard about the Quidditch teams having coaches. What are our thoughts on this? Harry has fewer nightmares as he's tired from training, and they find out Snape will be refereeing the match. He's never refereed before, and when Harry tells Ron and Hermione back in the common room, they tell him to make up excuses not to play, but he has to because there's no reserve seeker. Neville comes toppling into the common room. Malfoy hit him with the leg locker curse, and he's had to hop from outside the library all the way back. Everyone laughs at him, but Hermione undoes the spell, and Ron tells Neville he has to stand up to Malfoy, quote, "He's used to walking all over people, but that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier." "There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be in Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that," Neville chokes. Harry gives him a chocolate frog and tells Neville he's worth 12 of Malfoy, reminding him the Sorting Hat chose to put him in Gryffindor. Neville smiles and gives Harry back the card from the chocolate frog as Harry collects them. Harry looks at the card and says, quote, "Dumbledore again. He was the first one I ever..." He gasps and looks at Ron and Hermione. "I found him," he whispered. "I found Flamel. I told you I'd read the name somewhere before." He reads the back of the chocolate frog card to them, quote, "and his work on alchemy with his partner Nicolas Flamel." Hermione at this dashes upstairs and comes back with an enormous old book. She flicks through until she finds, quote, "Nicolas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone." She gives him the book to read, quote, The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Philosopher's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicolas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Perenelle, 658. Hermione surmises that's what Fluffy is guarding, and they realise that's why they couldn't find him in any of the books they were looking in. He's, quote, not exactly recent if he's 665. In the movie, there's a transition scene after Dumbledore tells Harry not to look for the mirror, and I love this. And actually, throughout the movie to this point, the way they've included Hedwig where they can, it's more than in the book, and it makes the relationship with her and Harry just there's more of a connection shown, and this transitions the movie from winter into spring. They are in the library, and Hermione slams down an enormous book, which I always worry will land on Harry's hand. It looks like in the movie it only just misses it. She opens it and reads about Nicolas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone. Here, Hermione uncovers who Flamel is, not Harry. Like in the book, she tells them that's what Fluffy is guarding. And so ends this part of the movie around 1 hour, 38 minutes, and 36 seconds. But in the book, there's so much more. In class, they discuss what they'd do if they had the stone, and when Ron mentions he'd buy a Quidditch team, Harry remembers Snape is refereeing the next match. Everyone in the team is nervous. If they win, they can overtake Slytherin in the House Cup, and no one has done that in 7 years. Harry keeps running into Snape and thinks that Snape's trying to catch him alone. Snape's horrible to Harry in potions, and Harry's starting to wonder if Snape knows they found out about the stone. He has a feeling Snape can read minds. Can he? It's the day of the Quidditch match. Ron and Hermione have secretly been practicing Locomotor Mortis, the leg locker curse, so they can use it on Snape if they need to. The whole school's turned out, even Professor Dumbledore, and this makes Harry relax because there's no way that Snape's going to try anything with Dumbledore there. Snape does look angry though, and he awards Hufflepuff a penalty when George Weasley hits a bludger towards him. Harry is searching everywhere for the snitch. In the stands, Malfoy is behind them making remarks about Ron and Neville being poor and having no brains when Hermione sees Harry go into a dive after the snitch. Ron's had enough of Malfoy and he starts wrestling with him, and Neville joins in fighting Crabbe and Goyle. Harry is speeding at Snape, and Snape turns just as Harry bolts past, catching the snitch. The Gryffindors all spill onto the pitch, cheering. Dumbledore tells Harry well done, and Snape spits bitterly on the ground. Later, Harry is taking his broomstick to the broom shed, feeling happier than he can ever remember. He's remembering being lifted up by the team and looking over at the castle when he sees, quote, a hooded figure come swiftly down the front steps of the castle. Clearly not wanting to be seen, it walked as fast as possible towards the Forbidden Forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched. He recognized the figure's prowling walk. Snape sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. What was going on? Harry jumped back on his Nimbus 2000 and took off, gliding silently over the castle. He saw Snape enter the forest at a run. He followed. He lands in a tree when he finds Snape talking to Quirrell and overhears Snape saying students weren't supposed to know about the Philosopher's Stone. Snape then asks Quirrell if he's found a way to get past the beast of Hagrid's. Snape tells Quirrell that he doesn't want him as his enemy and, quote, we'll have another little chat soon when you've had time to think things over and decide where your loyalties lie. He leaves Quirrell standing in the forest looking quite petrified. And this is the conversation in the movie that happens after Harry left the library before finding the mirror. There's a bit more ambiguity in Book Snape, which I think is for the better. The line of asking Quirrell if he found a way past the three-headed dog is not in the movie, so we don't see the red herrings that She Who Must Not Be Named leaves for us. Harry gets back to the common room and Ron is happy and there's a celebration in the common room, but Harry says never mind that, and they go into a classroom and check Peeves isn't around, and then he tells them what he's just seen. In the book, Harry is the one who says, quote, "So we were right, it is the Philosopher's Stone, and Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and he said something about Quirrell's hocus pocus. I reckon there are other things guarding the stone apart from Fluffy. Loads of enchantments, probably, and Quirrell would have done some anti-dark arts spell which Snape needs to break through." In the movie, they give all this to Hermione to say, which I hate. And that, friends, is the end of this section of chapters. Let's take a quick break. Welcome back. So, I get why it was done, but leaving out the second Quidditch match is just a real shame, I think. We know as we go through the films, we don't see much Quidditch, and it's always felt like to me in the Half-Blood Prince movie, they just whacked it in there because they freaked out and went, we're not going to include Quidditch again because it's not in the last book at all. And I've loved rereading all these Quidditch matches again and hearing Lee Jordan's commentary, and I can't wait to get to Luna's commentary in future books as well. The other thing I was sad that they left out was all the Christmas Day antics. Again, I get it's already a long movie and it was cut for time, but some of the extra long transition scenes could maybe have been shortened to allow some of the Weasley jumper shenanigans or Christmas lunch in the Great Hall with all that delicious food. What do you think? It's Pixie's Pinion time, where my cat Pixie has some comments on something from this stretch of chapters. This week, it's leaving out some lines that are to do with either foreshadowing or misleading the reader on character intentions. Example 1 is when Dumbledore joins Harry in front of the Mirror of Erised and says that the mirror will be moved and asks him not to go looking for it. He then says, quote, "If you ever do run across it, you will now be prepared." This is a huge hint and great foreshadowing for what's to come at the end of the book. And I've mentioned previously that the movies don't really have a lot of foreshadowing going on, but I feel leaving this line out, I don't know. In typing up these notes, I'm reminded of the whole show don't tell thing, but I just feel this line should have stayed in. Another line that I think should have stayed in is when Snape and Quirrell are meeting in the Forbidden Forest in the book, and Snape asks Quirrell, quote, "Have you found out how to get past that beast of Hagrid's yet?" I don't see the point of not having included this line in the movie. We already believe Snape is an awful person. We've been set up that way. And Harry and co already think he's the one trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, so why not just leave it in? It does no disservice to the storyline at all. Would you have liked these lines to be kept in as well? Let me know. We're now at the part of the podcast where Arya asks how these chapters are related to parts of my life. This week, it's definitely Christmas. It's my favorite time of the year because everyone is just so much happier. They'll be getting a break from work, they get to experience Christmas with their kids, they see their families, they get to give gifts. Growing up, Christmas always started on Christmas Eve. At Mum and Dad's, that's when we listen to an ancient Christmas record and put up the Christmas tree. The house is filled with Christmassy smells of the sausage rolls and fruit mince pies Mum was baking, and the ham or the turkey that Dad's pre-cooking for the next day. We watched Carols by Candlelight on TV, and when we got older, I was in charge of making cocktails. Christmas morning, we'd open presents and Dad would cook up a breakfast of eggs, tomatoes, bacon, chipolatas and toast, and we'd have spumante and orange juice, which you can get already combined here in the UK, and it's called Bucks Fizz. Lunch is turkey, ham, prawns, salads, roast potatoes, and roast pork as well. Depending on the weather, the turkey could be either hot or cold. Then desserts of trifle, pavlova, Christmas pudding, ice cream, and Mum's most delicious Christmas cake. Dinner is usually leftovers from lunch, and then spending time checking out the presents that we opened that morning before rolling into bed. Now, I can't put up my tree before Christmas Eve. On a couple of occasions, I've put it up a week before Christmas, but it just feels wrong. And also, now that I live in the UK, I also make mum's sausage rolls, but they have my little spin on them. Arya asks, what's a Christmas tradition in your family or something you do every Christmas? I can't believe another week has passed us, friends. That's all for today. Thank you so much again for tuning in. I'll be back next week to wrap up Philosopher's Stone with chapters 14 to 17, which is Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback, the Forbidden Forest, Through the Trapdoor, and the Man with Two Faces. Before I go, please remember to support the podcast any way you can. Rate and review wherever you're listening. This is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow on Instagram and Threads at A Novel Take Podcast, and I'll put all the links to all these things in the show notes. Please take care, everyone, and until next week, I'm Tracey, and may your favourite part of the book always make it into the adaptation. They know Wood's speech by heart. They were on the team last year. Wood just tells them to shut up, which I think is great. In the which is great. It's so good. Shut up. I can imagine. I can just see it. The crowd see him, quote, clap his mans. That's not even a word. Fuck.
Hi, chicken. Pixie's come to join us. Hi, Pix. Say hello to the folks.
His hands press flat against the grass. Fuck. Grass. Mr. Flamel, who operated? What the fuck?
Do you want to say hi, Pix? I hope I got that. That's so cute. You're too cute, Pixie. Smart.